Hey there folks, Kambotrout here, and if you are in the Maryland and Virginia or Potomac waters area, there is some breaking news, some big news in the striper, or if you're in Maryland, rockfish fishing community. So in this video, I'm going to break it down for you what those regulatory changes are, who created them, and why. So let's get to it. So first things first, who was this decision handed down by? It was handed down by the ASFMC. If you're not familiar with that particular commission, it is the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission. And their founding, their purpose is to manage the migratory species that run between the waters of the various states along the Atlantic seaboard. The idea being that it's not effective or efficient for each state to set different regulations when these fish are migratory and it's a shared resource. I'll get into more maybe in a later video about the creation of the ASFMC. I actually did work in a study on that particular organization, its founding and its purpose as part of my master's work back in the day at Hopkins. But anyway, let's look at these regulation changes. And I have to say overall, I'm pretty pleased. So getting right to it, if you are fishing in the Maryland, Virginia, or Potomac waters, the new regulation states you may only keep one fish, and that one striped bass has to be in a slot limit between 19 and 24 inches. If you're fishing coastal waters, the slot limit is going to be from 28 to 31 inches. And one of the biggest changes that has come down with this new ruling is that there is no longer a sector separation limit between recreational and charter fishing. This applies to everyone across the board, which I have to say is a long time coming. This is a shared resource. We should all be sharing this load and this responsibility together. Now, a few things are still up for consideration because in the recent history, Maryland issued an emergency action which ended the trophy rockfish season. But now that this new ruling has been handed down, that question is still up for debate. So hopefully the new leadership at Maryland DNR, which has been more receptive than a lot of the leadership has been in the past to recreational and angler input, hopefully we're going to make the right call here and shut down this trophy season. We have got to stop harvesting these big breeders. And here's why. The amount of eggs laid by a large big breeder, and I'm saying large, you're talking a high 30s, 40 plus inch fish. These are enormous fish. They lay orders of magnitude more eggs than do the smaller fish. They also have the genetics that it takes to be able to survive and perpetuate the species and produce more of those big breeders that we need to keep the overall fishery stock healthy and reproducing. That's why it's so crucial that A, we protect these fish, and B, whenever we catch them, we take very good care of them. If you're handling a very large fish like that, you don't want to hold them up like this by the jaw. Plenty of belly support, only have them out of the water for the minimum amount of time possible if you really want to get that photo, and then make sure you help that fish recuperate before you release it. Maybe we'll get into another video in the future about how to handle those big fish, but it's very important because at the end of the day, this is a shared resource and we have to handle it responsibly because the recruitment studies, the reproductive studies on striped bass lately, whether it's up in the Hudson River in New York or down here in Maryland, the data does not look good. And I'll probably overlay some of that over here on the screen. We've got to do a better job. And I know there's going to be some out there that are going to blame invasives, and to a degree, they're certainly having an impact. I'm not saying they're not, especially the blue cats, because between outcompeting them, eating the eggs, eating the fish, and being of a size and occupying a lot of the same water columns and water levels and areas of the environment as striped bass, the invasives are having an impact. There's no doubt about that. However, keep in mind, there was a moratorium back in the 80s on striped bass because we mismanaged that resource. At the end of the day, this all comes back to us. We are the top of the food chain. We're the only ones that can intelligently manage a resource. This eventually comes back to us. So what I want to say to kind of close this out are two main points. First, thank you to the ASFMC. Thank you for handing down this ruling that's going to apply to all these states because it takes a lot of vested interests who we're trying to argue for different solutions for what I would argue are selfish and short-sighted reasons. But the bottom line is, it's not that I'm not sensitive to people trying to make a livelihood or a living off this fish. We need to manage it responsibly. That's point one. Point two, make sure you're following organizations like Fish Talk Magazine, CCA Maryland, or Maryland DNR, because prior to this decision, A lot of this resulted from angler input, fisheries biologist input, and there are comment periods that open up frequently on different regulatory changes before they are made. And I know, believe me, I know, in the past it's been very frustrating, especially with Maryland DNR, about feeling like we're just shouting into the wind and our input receives no acknowledgement whatsoever, and the decisions always go against the majority of the angler input or the public feedback. In this case, that has not been what we've been seeing, and it looks like the new leadership at Maryland DNR may be taking a much more receptive stance to our input. So make sure you follow places like Fish Talk Magazine, make sure you follow Maryland DNR, and subscribe to those emails and notifications so that when these new regulatory changes are up for debate, you can put your own input in there. And this applies across the board, whether it's regulations on crabbing, other species of fish, be it summer flounder, speckled trout. All these regulatory changes usually open up for a comment from the public. And if you're following Fish Talk Magazine and CCA Maryland and other outlets, they'll notify you when it opens up, and then you can go ahead and provide that input. Again, the couple of things that remain open, whether or not we're going to have a trophy season. If we have a trophy harvest season, I think it'll be one of the most idiotic decisions that we've ever seen in the history of fisheries management. That's my personal opinion. Second thing right here is that the other debate that rages on is whether or not the catch and release of these big breeders and the catch and release season in general is a big detriment to the fish. Let's be clear. There is no data to support that, period. Because the catch and release season on striped bass usually occurs when the water is very cool. And by very cool, I mean like 61 degrees and under. Based on the studies they've done, if that water is 61 degrees or cooler, the mortality rate for catch and release is like around 1%, 1.6%. Extremely low, about as low as you can get. And long story short, catch and release is not the issue here. Catch and release, there's no data that supports the notion that catch and release is resulting in the fish dropping their eggs from stress. There's no data to support these arguments. So, catch and release is not the issue, and this should be common sense. The issue is us harvesting too many fish and harvesting those big breeders. Again, to close things out, the new regulatory change, if you're in Maryland, Virginia, or Potomac waters, new slot limit, 1 fish per person, 19 to 24 inches, 1 fish per person per day. And if you're fishing those coastal waters, 28 to 31 inch slot limit, which is fantastic because we're protecting those big breeders. You want to keep the fishery stock going. You want to continue having fun and preserve this resource for the future and our children. This is how we do it. I think that rounds things out, folks. You've heard my stance on it. Let me know your stance in the comments, and we can go from there. All right, y'all. Have a good one.